It's an early June morning in the northern suburbs of Edinburgh. The sky a pale blue, as if washed clean by the rain of the night before. A gentle breeze drifts through the old wooden windows, carrying the scent of lavender from the small front garden. Inside the rustic house, the gentle sound of the kettle boiling mingles with the chirping of sparrows on the porch. Sam Hogan is preparing breakfast, slicing bread, and looking out the window where the early morning sunlight makes everything seem to slow down. In the next room, his wife Caitriona is in her 8th month of pregnancy. For weeks now, their mornings have started like this. She meditates and writes a few lines in her diary. He cooks and watches quietly, feeling strangely at peace. These days they talk a lot about the baby, about the future, about the small cream-colored room where the baby is waiting to be born. They both know that the road ahead is new and challenging, but when they have each other, everything seems less scary. Sam believed he was ready to be a father, and Caitriona was filled with anticipation for holding her. But life had a way of throwing a dark note into the best moments. When Sam walked into the room with a glass of orange juice in his hand, the sight before him made all the noise stop. Caitriona was sitting sideways in her chair, one hand on her stomach. Her face pale sweat beading on her forehead, her eyes flashing with panic. "Sam, something's wrong," she whispered softly, her voice weak. In that moment, the morning's calm vanished, as if it had never existed, and their world suddenly lurched. Sam almost dropped his glass of orange juice as he rushed forward, kneeling beside the chair. He took her hand, feeling her cold skin and shivering slightly. His heart was pounding, but he forced himself to stay calm. Without hesitation, he reached for the phone, dialed the emergency number, and said urgently, "My wife is 8 months pregnant. She has severe abdominal pain. Her face is pale. She is sweating. We are at 17 Linden Street." Just a few minutes later, the sound of an ambulance siren tore through the quiet space of the neighborhood. Sam quickly put a coat on Caitriona and carried her outside. The sky was still blue, but to him everything became heavy and blurred at the edges of his vision. In the car, the lights were flashing continuously. The monitor was beeping each beat like a countdown. Sam squeezed her hand, pressed his forehead against his wife's, and whispered through his rapid breaths, "I'm here. It's okay. We'll be okay." But deep inside him, fear was growing like a raging wave. He had never felt so helpless, no longer the strong male lead in front of the camera, but just a man who wished to keep his own little world. When the doors of the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary swung open, the smell of antiseptic and the blinding white light of battle flooded in. Inside the emergency room, everything happened so quickly that Sam could barely make out the cold medical terminology: hypertension, preeclampsia, monitor closely, prepare for ICU. The doctors and nurses moved around Caitriona like a machine that had been rehearsed 1,000 times. But to Sam, each moment felt like an eternity. He took a step back, both to let them do their work and to hide the way his hands were shaking. A doctor stepped forward, his eyes stern but his voice calm. "Mr. Hughson, your wife's condition shows signs of preeclampsia. Her blood pressure is unstable. We're moving her to the intensive care unit to avoid complications. Be prepared, the situation could change very quickly." Sam nodded, but his throat felt tight. He wanted to ask dozens of questions, wanted to hold his wife's hand tightly, but the ICU door had closed, leaving him standing alone in the cold white hallway. Less than half an hour later, what he feared most came from another direction. His phone vibrated continuously. A message from his best friend Sam. "What's going on?" "The news is blowing up on Twitter." He turned it on. The screen was filled with sensational headlines. "Shocking Caitriona Balfe, hospitalized while pregnant with her first child with Sam Hogan." The hashtag #PrayForCaitriona flooded the newsfeed, spreading like wildfire. Worried fans and reporters began to gather in front of the hospital gate. Sam held his phone looking at those words. Anger and helplessness rose in his heart. This was not a scene for everyone to gossip about. This was the life of his wife and child. He put the phone in his pocket, sat down on the cold bench in the hallway. His hands clasped together until his knuckles turned white. There was only one prayer in his mind. Please keep them safe. Sam closed his eyes, took a deep breath, trying to hold on to the distant sound of the doctor's footsteps and the echoing sound of the machines from behind the door. Time stretched into thin strands so tight that it seemed like a breath could snap them. Every minute that passed, he wondered what they were doing to Caitriona, if she was in pain, if the baby was struggling for some safety in her mother's womb. The ICU door suddenly opened. A nurse walked quickly toward him. Her voice soft but urgent. Sam, we need you to sign a consent form for an emergency cesarean section. Your wife's blood pressure is skyrocketing. The risk of seizures is very high. The paper before his eyes seemed to blur because his eyes had been wet for a while. He picked up the pen to sign his handwriting, shaky but decisive. The nurse took the paper back, only had time to say, "We will do our best," before turning back inside. The door closed again, swallowing the gaze he had just tried to follow. Outside, the clamor of reporters and fans seemed to have reached the ground floor glass doors. Faces pressed against them, cameras raised flashes flashing indifferently. Sam stood up and walked toward the less crowded waiting area. He needed some space to breathe, but the smell of antiseptic, the white light and the cold of the hallway, seemed to surround him, pushing him deeper into a sense of loneliness. In that moment, Sam realized he had never been so afraid of losing everything. Not for his career, his reputation, or any of the glittering things out there, but for a room where the woman he loved most and his child, who had yet to see the light of day, were fighting between life and death. He leaned back against the wall, looking down at his hands, imagining the small warm feeling of a son or daughter's hand holding his finger one day, and then he made a silent promise. If they returned to him safely today, he would spend his life protecting them no matter what. At the same time, the intercom rang, calling his name to the operating room. Sam's heart clenched at the sound of the loudspeaker. He walked quickly, almost running, following the nurse's instructions to the operating room. Through the frosted glass door, he could only see the green gowns moving busily, the surgical lights shining brightly, like a cold sun hanging high above. A doctor stepped out, took off his mask. His eyes tired, but with a hint of warmth. Both mother and baby are safe. Your baby is a boy. His health is stable. Caitriona needs to rest in the recovery room. But the danger is over. Sam's chest felt as if it had been freed from the terrible weight it had been carrying for so long. He nodded repeatedly, his thanks choking in his throat. When he was brought into the recovery room, he saw Caitriona lying on her side, her face pale but peaceful, her tired eyes opening slightly at the sound of his footsteps. "Are we okay?" Her voice was as thin as a breath. "Yes, okay, you and the baby. I'm here." Sam sat down, holding his wife's hand this time, warmer and more alive than ever. The nurse gently placed a tiny creature in his hand, wrapped in a pale blue blanket. Sam looked at his son, his heart melting into 1,000 pieces. He kissed the baby's forehead, then leaned down and whispered, "Welcome to this world, where I will do everything to protect you and Mom." Outside the news, the hashtags, the flashes of cameras continued to swirl in the noisy world. But in this small room, there were only 3 people, a family, and a newly found palmares, a piece that Sam knew he would never let go of again.